Today's webinar on measuring impact for Main Street transformation. Just a couple quick housekeeping notes before we get started here. The session is being recorded and will be available for viewing after the webinar concludes. So if you want to go back and listen to anything or missed anything, it will be available. Also, everyone is on mute. If you have any questions or issues throughout the webinar, either use that chat function there, or there's a questions panel and just ask some questions there. There are kind of certain stopping points that we will stop for questions throughout the webinar, and then we have about 15 to 20 minutes reserved at the end for questions as well. But again, just feel free to type those in as you think of them, and we will hit them as we as we hit those stop points. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Matt Wagner, who will do a quick welcome and some introductions.
Great, thanks, Steve. Hi, everyone. We got a great crowd this afternoon, so thanks for joining us for the Measuring Impact for Main Street Transformation webinar. So as Steve mentioned, I'm Matt Wagner. I'm the Vice President of Revitalization Programs here at the National Main Street Center. And I'm really pleased to introduce Jon Stover and Leslie Deacon, who are leading today's webinar. They're going to walk us through really these principles around how do we better measure and communicate Main Street's impact. This is such an important topic. Often we spend a lot of time on doing great work, but the ability to communicate that success to our stakeholders out there, our investors, our funders, is really critically important as we think about advocacy and demonstrating our success. And so the work that we're going to see today is really focused on the new transformation strategy process that we unveiled about 2 years ago now, that we called the refresh, and is part of a new resource guide that was just released this previous month. So Jon Stover, just a little bit about our speakers today. Jon Stover is the founder and managing partner of Jon Stover Associates. He's an expert in neighborhood revitalization and private-public economic development initiatives, as well as specializing in real estate market analysis, fiscal, and economic impact analysis. Leslie is our project manager with Stover Associates, and she's a certified professional planner with a focus in economic development, physical planning, and community development. So just the right folks we were able to work with who've not only done this work for a lot of times in a long time in other communities, but have really been actively engaged in a number of Main Street programs across the country. So they get and they know Main Street very, very well. So before I turn it over to them, I just wanted to remind you of the suite of tools and resources that I alluded to earlier, as well as the one that we're talking about today that we've released. You can find them under the member section on our website, but we hope you'll turn to those for additional, and so you can sort of see the complete picture of the refresh and developing your own transformation strategies, understanding sort of market analysis from the light perspective, as well as doing great community engagement to understand sort of vision and those incredible and important community assets that reflect your unique market-based position in the economy out there. So finally, if you have, oops, I guess we're getting a little feedback. But finally, if you have any questions during the webinar, please feel free to type them in the chat box that you'll see. I think in most people's it's in the lower sort of right-hand side of your screen. And Jon and Leslie will be monitoring those and can answer them as they come up on our end or yours. So thanks, everyone. And now I will turn it over to Jon and Leslie.
Good afternoon, everyone, and morning to the West Coasters out there. As we work with the Main Street community, I feel that reinvestment statistics and the whole concept of program impact is something that most people have a generally good idea of what that means, but there's still a lot of confusion out there about some of the specifics about how we can capitalize on it, about what the National Main Street Center and Main Street America does with this data, how folks can kind of leverage this more internally. So the purpose of the work that we've done with National Main Street Center is twofold in terms of this resource. First is to have really a central place to kind of define these reinvestment statistic metrics and help guide how to collect this information in kind of a more rote or administrative way. And then secondly, it's about, okay, well, how do we leverage this information to help understand the way that we impact our communities, to help us communicate this to our stakeholders, and to help us use this information internally to help guide and direct what we do in our program operations. And now a lot of states require additional metrics or have specific state-specific or program-specific transformation strategies and other requirements that at times go beyond this guide. And this guide kind of speaks generally to a lot of that, but I know a lot of states have additional information or resources that are more state-specific that you may want to reach out to potentially your program coordinating programs about if that may apply to you. And really this webinar is intended to give kind of a quick overview, but certainly not at the expense of looking through the guide, and definitely ask questions away. And as Matt and Steve both mentioned, there's that chat box feature, and hopefully we will be able to spend a good portion of this kind of in more of a conversation format and answering specific questions that you may have. So in terms of the contents of the report, there's kind of 5 sections. The first is kind of setting the stage of, what are, why are we collecting data, and what is this data that we're collecting through reinvestment statistics? Kind of setting the stage. Secondly is the section on, how do we define these metrics and what are the best processes for collecting this information. Third is all about kind of using metrics to evaluate effectiveness and improve programs. So really kind of leveraging it, whether that is through transformation strategies, whether that's through program evaluation, or whether that's kind of other types of internal ways to understand and kind of utilize this information as much as possible. Fourth section is about what are the tools or mechanisms for communicating this. So having the knowledge is half the battle, but communicating it and building the right advocacy and partnerships with this information, whether it's helping to solicit additional partnerships, whether it's helping in fundraising, whether it's helping build buy-in of your businesses or stakeholders, all important. And then the final portion of the data guide, of this resource guide, is specific data resources or particular resources where you can go to get different types of information that may be helpful at the all the way up from the local to regional to statewide to federal level. And maybe if we're able to kind of flip through the guide, we're able to get control of the screen. Just to kind of give you, I always need kind of a visual. I'll just kind of thumb through briefly kind of what the report looks like. And again, this is linked from the Main Street website. So, that fundamental question of why is this important? Why is having this information and tracking this information important? And there's, a few major high priority aspects to this. First and foremost, understanding who it is that you're serving. By understanding the scope and scale of whether it's residents and businesses and type of businesses, using information to help you understand what your stakeholder needs are and who your stakeholders are. Secondly, to be able to record over time, what have you accomplished? What are the conditions locally, and then not only for yourself, but to be able to kind of have those numbers to show to your stakeholders accomplishments over time. Third is the advocacy component of using this to kind of show the kind of tried and true whether trends or improvements or impacts, and being able to have as we're I think we've all seen that kind of from local to state to federal, public and private sector becoming more data driven and wanting to see the specifics and the proof in the pudding, and so being able to have kind of numbers to support fundraising efforts in this more and more competitive environment. Another kind of main important component is being able to look internally at your program's impacts. Is your volunteer drive or your volunteer drive hours increasing or decreasing? Is the investment in your neighborhood increasing and decreasing? Does that mean that more of your programs need to be oriented towards addressing certain aspects? And again, tracking how the community has changed over time, and using all this information to continue to improve what we're all doing at the local level. So reinvestment statistics are a standardized set of about 11 metrics that all local Main Street programs are required to collect and then report to the coordinating program, so in turn compile the data and send that on to the National Main Street Center. And because it's the same metrics collected in the same way, it allows programs to be compared in a more standardized apples-to-apples way than you might otherwise find. And then again, what that allows you to do is not only kind of use this information to understand or assess one program, but that can be aggregated, be it statewide, be it regionally, or be it federally. And so this helps whether leadership at the local Main Street level, at the coordinating program level, or at the national level, again, understand who they're serving, provide this information packaged in a way or aggregated in a way that meets their needs and the stakeholder needs, to provide evidence to the funders, to help evaluate needs and so forth.
Great. So we've been working with the National Main Street Center on the reinvestment statistic collection process for a few years now. And one of the key takeaways when we talk with programs about collecting these statistics is that it'd be really helpful to make sure everyone has that clear definition on what these data points are and just some best practices for collecting this information. And that gets back to this idea of making sure it's all apples to apples across all 45 coordinating programs. So what we've done is we've included this in our resource guide. You want to check out page 5 and 6 for this. What we do is we break down each of the 11 reinvestment statistics and just provide a really clear, simple definition, as well as just a really clear, simple collection method or best practice about collecting that data point. So I'm going to just walk through really quickly each of these reinvestment statistics and just kind of go over some key takeaways with some collection methods. So first, with full-time jobs created, what we're looking for is the sum of all changes in full-time employment at businesses within your Main Street district, whereas the part-time jobs created is, of course, the sum of all changes in part-time employment in businesses. We also look at new businesses created, and that's the total change in businesses. And when you see these definitions in our resource guide, you're going to see in parentheses net. So what does net mean? Well, that simply just means that you take into account the jobs and businesses that are no longer in existence. So for example, if you have 4 businesses that opened in your Main Street last year, but 2 businesses closed last year, then you're going to report a total number of 2 net new businesses for your Main Street program. In terms of rehabilitation projects, those are just rehab, such as repairs, renovations, modifying, reconstruction. Here, typically, most programs look for significant changes where it really has an impact on your Main Street corridor. We always like to recommend using ribbon-cutting ceremonies or move-in dates as kind of benchmarks for when a rehab project is completed or when a new construction project is completed. Public improvement projects can be anything from streetscaping to lighting to public signage, parks, transportation. We really recommend that you work with your local municipalities on tracking these projects, they'll also be able to help provide the total number of dollars for public investment that have been allocated for your Main Street program or have been put into your Main Street district. Private investment includes anything ranging from private donations to Main Street grants to new construction or redevelopment that's funded by the private sector. Again, that's the total number of dollars. Volunteer hours just simply means the total number of hours that are volunteered within your Main Street program. And then the last two is the average organizational budget and the number of programs for coordinating programs. These are both just the coordinating level, so Main Street local level folks don't need to worry too much. One of the new things that we're doing is we're also tracking boundary maps for Main Street programs. And this is really just the geographic area of where your Main Street district is. If you're a new Main Street program, this is definitely something that you want to pay particular attention to. Or if you have considerable changes in your boundary a certain year, you'd also want to provide that update. National Main Street Center has been tracking and mapping all of the Main Street programs across the country. I think the database is up to close to 1,000 Main Street programs, so we always want to make sure that that's being updated and maintained. We highlight in the guide a few best practices that we recommend for collecting reinvestment statistics. It's very important that the data that's provided through the reinvestment statistics are accurate, but we also know that for some programs this can be a very time-consuming task. So definitely keep an eye out for any additional trainings that you might see at the Main Street Now conference or just with your coordinating programs as well. A lot of times they'll have supplemental training to help you all keep the process as efficient and easy while collecting the most accurate data. Also keep consistent with your data. So of course we're rolling out these definitions and recommending collection methods. Pay particular attention to how you've been doing it in the past. You want to make sure that your data can tell a consistent story. So once you start changing how you're collecting data, you can kind of change your numbers sometimes. So make sure to pay particular attention to the past as well as look for kind of trend lines in your data. This will help kind of indicate any errors or glitches in your data year to year. If you see giant jumps in businesses or giant jumps in employment, that's a good sign that there might be a little glitch that you might want to go back and double check. And then we really recommend building relationships with your local municipality. You know, Main Street data is some of the best data out there, and working with your community is really the key to a lot of these data points and making sure that they're really accurate and reflective of what the conditions are in your program area. Okay, so don't forget, yes, reinvestment statistics are super helpful for the National Main Street Center, but they're also really helpful for your own program. They align very closely with the four-point approach, and we included in the guide some examples of how you can apply reinvestment statistics data to answer key questions about your community, which can help inform your programmatic efforts. So we thought we'd pause here before moving on and just check to see if there's any questions specific to the reinvestment statistics. We do have some time at the end of our webinar too for additional questions, but Steve, if you want to shoot over any questions that folks have might have typed in by now.
Yes, we had a few come in, but again, yeah, as we mentioned earlier, if there are other questions, feel free to either use that chat box or there's a question panel. But a couple questions that came in. I noticed the guide that you talked about, the reinvestment ratio and the fiscal impact. Are these the same thing, or can you clarify the difference between these two?
Yeah, that's a great question and a common question too. And so there's a couple kind of key ways that programs and nationally we're using numbers to communicate what is the relationship between the programming and the private investment and the nonprofit investment through Main Streets and the relationship with that and how other investment is spurred. And so what a reinvestment ratio is comparing the ratio, the quantity of private dollars to public sector dollars invested in a neighborhood. And so there's no causality in that relationship, but it can show, okay, is most investment happening here just private and not public? What's the implications of that? Is most the investment here public but not private? What's the implications of that? What a fiscal impact is what is the causal relationship? What is the, or at least correlation between what a program is doing and the fiscal revenue that it comes to a municipality. So, for example, if there's a festival and you're able to ascertain how many people come to that festival from outside a municipality that wouldn't otherwise be there, and you know how much they spent, and you know how much the sales tax is, and you know how much revenue was generated for the city. And so there's correlation between the numbers of a fiscal impact assessment.
Good. Couple more thoughts on adding sales tax as a metric. And I don't know, John and Leslie, if you guys want to take that, or Matt, if you want to take that. Or both of you.
I missed what you said there, Steve.
Thoughts on adding sales tax as a metric? I'm assuming they mean sales tax revenue would be my guess. Yeah.
So we work with a lot of local folks on that. That is a statistic that a metric that in some places is really easy to get, and in some places is absolutely impossible to get. So I think that that's more of a local level question. I could understand why certain programs would want to collect that information, and that's really getting at the source of the value you're creating, both frankly to businesses if you're measuring sales, and especially to the municipality that you're in. However, that's probably not something that I would recommend be mandated, across country, because there's a lot of cities, counties, states where just that information just isn't easily available or packaged in a way where that'd be very easy for local programs.
Great. Now, one other question. I noticed square foot of building/units was not included. Is there a reason for not including this in the reinvestment stats?
That's a metric that, again, some states require of their programs. It's also something that oftentimes requires a heavy lift. It's one of those aspects that's often really difficult for folks on the ground to collect. So where there could be some utility, it's not necessarily, you're not getting as much bang for your buck in terms of the effort that it would take to actually compile that information. And on the residential unit side of the equation, I know that's something, frankly, that might be something for you to respond to, National Main Street folks. I know that's something that's been toyed with and that has been, I believe is that on the card? I know that's something that's been discussed and oftentimes is one of the reinvestment statistics. It's also something that's relatively easy to collect for folks, and you can use third-party data relatively easily to compile that as well. But if there's additional insights from the national folks, jump in on that.
Yeah, no, we did track downtown housing units at one point, but we haven't the last couple of years. So it's something we can certainly revisit. That covers all the questions we have to date.
I'm gonna chime in real fast, just to kind of add on to what John was saying with building square footage. If you are interested in tracking that for your Main Street program, or if your state coordinating program requires that you track your building square footage, we always recommend contacting your municipality, especially like the planning or the GIS or the auditor. Those are kind of the typical departments that have that information, and they'll be able to provide you with the total parcels in your Main Street program with that data, the building square footage. So that's a little tip and trick that we like to use rather than trying to go to every building owner, every landlord in the area and track how many or the total amount of square footage. Okay,
good.
great.
Well, that gets through first round. So.
Okay, great. So we're going to switch gears just a little bit. Reinvestment statistics aren't, of course, the only type of data that Main Street programs should consider. We do talk about what we call KPIs in this guide. You'll see it as a little call-out box. KPIs are key performance indicators that are really just quantitative metrics that are used to track and assess progress of something over time. So, for example, reinvestment statistics are a type of KPI, but there's a lot of additional KPIs that Main Streets might want to monitor and develop for your program so that you can kind of track and measure the successes of your initiatives and your programming and kind of guide changes throughout time. So as Matt mentioned, keying off the webinar, we do talk about transformation strategies and how this relates to data for Main Street programs so that you can start to really measure the impacts and the achievements of your transformation strategy. You'll see that there's 7 different transformation strategies highlighted in the guide. There's, of course, many more transformation strategies out there, but hopefully this can kind of provide you with a snapshot of the types of KPIs or metrics or data points that might be helpful for you in relationship to kind of your chosen transformation strategy. So for here, for example, if entertainment and nightlife activity is like a key thing that you're focusing on for your Main Street, a KPI that would be really helpful to track would be the percentage of businesses that are open past 9 or 10 o'clock at night on the weekend. And so year to year, during different benchmarks of periods of time, you'll be able to say like, okay, well, we used to only have 15% of businesses that were open, and now we're up to 30%, and you can really start to demonstrate your impact and your progress on your specific transformation strategies with these indicators. So, of course, we're not telling anyone to go and collect a whole bunch of data that's not relevant, but think through what would be helpful for your program in telling your Main Street story. And feel free to kind of start incorporating some of these ideas and some of these approaches into your data collection on your side of the equation. We touched a little bit about impact on our fiscal impact question, but let's talk a little bit more about this. So in our guide, we address 3 different types of impacts that are especially relevant for Main Street programs, whether that's at the local, state, or regional, or national level. And here we're talking about economic, fiscal, and community impact. So we provide the definitions of all of these in the guide and also some examples, as well as some kind of questions and things that you can think through. So economic impact really just measure how programs help generate revenue or contribute to the economy. That's typically through sales revenue that a business might have generated because of assistance by a Main Street program, or jobs or businesses that were created and reported through their reinvestment statistics. Those are all types of economic impact. As John already alluded to, fiscal impacts communicate the impact of programs on municipal and state governments. That generally kind of fits into 3 buckets of property tax, income tax, if applicable to your state, and then sales tax. And so that's really what the revenue is that municipalities and state governments are gaining. And then lastly, we have community impact. This is maybe probably the most straightforward. These describe how Main Street programs help communicate their communities and add value to their neighborhood. A lot of times these are qualitative stories or qualitative measures, such as having community serving amenities or events that a Main Street might offer, historic preservation, the improvement of the built environment, or even just improving the vibrancy or walkability of your downtown. Those all kind of fit within the bucket of the community impact. Main Street programs, of course, want to make sure that they're communicating their impact in their data. Main Streets have so many different types of stakeholders. You want to make sure that the type of data that you communicate is really the most applicable to your Main Street programs or your Main Street stakeholders. So this guide walks through a lot of different tools of leveraging data and best practices for communicating data. We really recommend that when you collect data, especially your reinvestment statistics or any data that's required by your coordinating program, don't just provide it to national and to your state, but also use that for your program as well. Make sure that that gets included on any like promotional materials or memos to your city government. On your website is a great place to kind of flesh your reinvestment statistics. We see that pretty often and always appreciate. You really want people to know that you're doing great things in your program and that there's measurable success that comes from your Main Street. We also include in our guide kind of a handy list of best practices for advocating for your program. This really just kind of gets along the whole story of measuring your impact and then communicating your impact. And so these are opportunities to, again, include that information and kind of fill out the greater picture of your Main Street story. So many of you guys, of course, are probably already doing this, but feel free to kind of glance through this in the guide, take a look at it periodically, and there might be an opportunity or a channel that you haven't thought of, or kind of a different approach that might be of help for you for advocating. Okay, and so the very last page of our guide, and the last section that we were going to really focus on in the webinar today, is this handy cheat sheet of data sources. These are kind of our favorite data sources, or our go-to data sources that we use a lot when we conduct analyses and help Main Street programs track their data. When we work with Main Street directly at a local level, these are really like our go-to. Most of them are really easy to use, and most are free or relatively inexpensive. American Fact Finder is a really user-friendly census portal that you can gain a lot of information about your community or your downtown. CoStar is kind of the leading commercial real estate data collector. This is the most expensive on the list. This is typically a subscription model that doesn't always work with Main Street budgets, but a lot of times you might find that your local municipality or local economic development agency has a license to CoStar, and they'll be able to pull vacancy, asking rent, a whole bunch of different types of commercial real estate information. Esri gets at comprehensive demographic data as well as different economic indicators in there too. There's a whole bunch of information. A report through Esri, if you just contact them directly, typically maybe like $75 or so, about $100. Again, that can be if you have a license with your city. They can often help you pull data and reports for an even lower fee. One of the unique things about Esri is that it allows you to, again, map your Main Street program and pull data that's specific to your boundary. Or when you look at programs like or providers like the American Fact Finder or the Census or American Community Survey, those are going to be a little bit larger agglomerates of data like your census tract or your municipality boundary. And then, of course, we always use Google. That always helps tell kind of where businesses are. Certain business listings is a really helpful guide for us. We mentioned this a couple of times, but we always recommend working with your local municipalities. They can definitely be your friend when you're looking for property values or building conditions or different types of land uses. And then also feel free to just Google your municipality or your state and open data. And that's kind of a key word that you'll see a lot of states or cities kind of having this open data initiative where they're making data specific to their area a little bit more transparent, and that can be often a lot more user-friendly than trying to go through original data sources. Again, like the census, it comes out every 10 years, so I think we'll get one from 2020 data in a few years. Right now we're still looking at 2010 data. And then lastly, just WalkScore, walkscore.com. You can look at a lot of like that walkability information. They also have more like crime information, kind of some amenities in your community. And that's kind of an interesting to track over time too. So everyone's assigned like a number. So like your downtown might be 76, but maybe next year there's more businesses that have opened, and now it's 80. It could be a KPI based on your Main Street. Cool. So
I might something throughout the guide is we kind of give a number of examples of what some local folks have done that illustrate some of these aspects. And I might jump in with a couple of examples that are also in the guide to kind of provide a more kind of an example of a story of how some main streets kind of used information, used data to measure their impact and communicate their impact. You can jump to each street. Mm-hmm. So a program that we do a lot of work with in Washington, D.C., 8th Street Main Street, won the GAMSA a few years ago. They have a really large and successful festival called 8th Street Festival, attracts a lot of folks. It's a level of scale in an urban environment that isn't the same scale that a lot of other main streets are on, but all the kind of mechanics within the story, this could be the festival, it sounds absurd, but it attracts nearly 150,000 people every year, but it could attract 1,500, and in terms of the impact assessment, the methodology, would be the same. But what 8th Street found is a couple of things. The amount of security and the cost to pay the city to put on a festival like this became so overwhelming that it was really difficult to just pay that amount. They're spending $100,000 per a year just on security, paying the DC Police Department. In addition, they're having some businesses that were saying, we don't feel that this festival is helping us. We're not seeing a sales increase. And so 8th Street Main Street did a fiscal and economic impact assessment of the festival. And we, during the festival, surveyed attendees to understand where they're coming from, how much money they're spending, where they're spending their money. And then afterwards, we surveyed the businesses to understand how much money do you normally make on at this time of day on a Saturday evening, and then how much money do you make during the festival. And we did that for a number of different types of retailers, and we found that restaurants and bars normally along the corridor make $15,000, and during the festival make $35,000 on average, for 132% increase. Neighborhood goods and services typically made about $5,000 and on September Saturday, and made a little over $8,000 for 57% increase. And then merchandise retailers make on the average Saturday a little over $2,000 and made $2,500 for about a 22% increase. And all told, the increase in sales was, including the vendors on the street as well, $6.1 million, which we know has a economic impact using our impact model of 58 jobs, $2.2 million in revenue, and a total DC revenue of $730,000. And so what the executive director is able to do is say, okay, city, we are having a really hard time raising the necessary $100,000 to pay for these expenses, but look at this is bringing the city directly $730,000 in revenue. And so this is currently an ongoing conversation he's having with the city, and he uses this process and has had very good luck historically in terms of working with the city and using data to help negotiate either more assistance or reduce costs in this type of way. But even further, not only did this kind of create the specific information in terms of city return on investment for reducing some costs to help this festival happen, but he learned a lot of valuable information to help support the businesses. So for example, he learned that, merchandise retailers only had a 22% impact, and there were certain ones that didn't even have a positive, or even had a negative, had less customers than normal. And what we found, though, is that the ones that didn't have a little sign or kiosk out front kind of got lost in the crowd, and the ones that did really well. So now he was able to go back and give that advice to retailers of, here's some things that you can do to help attract those customers and have the same, have this be a positive impact for you as well. In addition, we learned information such that there's a certain time of day that suddenly customers surged, and some, especially restaurants and bars, had too many staff at certain times and not enough others, and we were able to get that kind of information that helps support businesses. And then lastly, what we found is that some businesses that didn't do well during the festival, because a lot of their kind of typical customer base are local and certainly weren't going to shop there during the festival. But what it ended up doing is reintroducing and marketing the store and introducing these different types of stores to new audiences. And so even if their business declined a little bit during the festival, they had larger business and more customers, more new customers coming afterwards. And so we were able to, concisely communicate this information in a really kind of digestible, reader-friendly way that went both to the city to kind of, work with and partner with the city, and also be able to present that to the businesses to help support them as well. So that's kind of on a really micro level. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, and a number of you have probably heard us talk about this, but we're working with National Main Street Center on collecting economic indicator data across all programs in all municipalities across the country. And we're building this powerful data set that will allow us to track over time what is the attributable impact of local programs to the local business economics of jobs and sales, and how much do jobs and sales increase in places where there's a main street versus places where there's not a main street. So that's kind of at the very top level, the way that we're able to kind of use data to understand the impact of Main Street America nationwide. But is there anything you wanted to kind of close with?
Yeah, so we were just going to kind of give another plug on how to find this resource guide in case you don't have it. You can just head on over to Main Street America's website, go ahead and log into the members area, and then down in the Resource Center, there's a link in their digital library to download this guide. I know also those of you that are on the email list, I think there was a direct download link sent out a couple of weeks ago, which is probably how you found out about this webinar today. So we have about 15 minutes left, so we're right on schedule. That's really our overview of the measuring impact of the Main Street transformation. So if we have some time for questions and any other discussion points that folks might have or might want to talk about, Steve, has there been any more sent in your way?
Yes, we have a few more, and then again, good time for anyone else who has questions that they've thought of. Feel free to type those in, and as Leslie mentioned, we have about 15 minutes to get to them. So the first one probably is more for us. Are there examples of really good programs that share their reinvestment stats on their website? Or I guess John and Leslie, I don't know if you guys ever run across any, in your work, but I know I've seen them. One that pops to my head is for a coordinating program, which is Main Street Alabama. They have a nice kind of graphic at the bottom of their webpage. I believe it's mainstreetalabama.org. I know I've seen them elsewhere, but if anyone on the webinar has them listed on their website, feel free to chat those in or type them in, and we can pass that along. A couple other questions. Any examples of you showed the 8th Street example. Do you guys have any small rural community examples by chance, John and Leslie, that were done or that you have worked on elsewhere?
Yeah, I know some. I definitely know some folks have done this type of work at the local level, and actually thinking back, there's a presentation on it at the Main Street Now conference last year, and I'm blanking on some of the specifics, but I know that there's local programs that have done a lot of this type of stuff in-house in terms of just even doing, whether it's community surveys of attendees and spending to understand, to help kind of say, okay, this is the way that this event, this art installation has drawn more people, and then typically they spent this much money and it impacted our business in this way, and kind of use that to be able to help continue funding of that particular program. Some of the work that we've done on the impact side in more rural communities is the impact of one particular business on a main street or in a community, to kind of show the ripple effect of what that means for the community and ways that it might be able to partner with local stakeholders. So really the scale, the idea of kind of using these, the information that you have at hand to kind of look inwardly at, how should this inform your programming, or how can we kind of make a pitch out of this to show the ways that we're impacting folks, is the exact same thing, whether you're a town of 500 or a town of, 500,000.
Good. Let's see. Other questions. Are you aware of who or how to acquire an economic modeling program to track or estimate Main Street impact, such as income tax, property tax, sales tax revenues, money spent shopping, eating out, etc., realizing some of the data would have to be estimates if not available?
Yeah, we do. There's kind of two leading impact models out there that we're familiar with. The one is RIMS 2, and the other is IMPLAN. And IMPLAN is a little bit more user-friendly, kind of online modeling dashboard. And what that does, and also as a shout-out, we may be potentially, I'm maybe putting cart before my horse, but I'll just say it out loud anyway. We may be talking about this in great detail at the Main Street Now conference in Seattle. Feel free to edit this out of the webinar if that ends up not being the case. But what we're planning on doing is walking folks really kind of getting rid of the black box, saying, okay, here's how you literally buy, install, and use IMPLAN to do this yourself in-house. And it's relatively inexpensive to it. At the local level, it's something like $1,200. Statewide, it's more like $4,000 or $500. But the local level, it's about $1,000 to use. It's relatively easy to use. And what it does is it links for a certain amount. So you could say, okay, in this particular specific geography, if you have a, say, retail store with 4 employees, the model says, okay, well, on average, a retail store with 4 employees has pays their employees this much money and gets this much revenue, and even beyond that says, okay, well, also that typical store in this area with that kind of economic activity pays this much in sales tax, this much in property tax, and it kind of links all these different variables. And so all you need is a couple of starting points, and you're able to get a whole lot of really fantastic information. So that and RIMS 2 are kind of the main ways that most people do fiscal and economic impact modeling. So once you kind of know the base level of activity, and frankly, for folks that have the capacity to do it, it's even worth playing around with. It's a pretty cool software. It's relatively easy to learn, and not only does it say the direct relationship between jobs and salaries and sales and fiscal revenues, but it also gives you the direct in and induce. So it says on average in this area, if you have a store, 4-person store, well, those employees are going to spend a certain amount of money locally, and that's going to lead to $1,000 of local restaurant revenue. And then it also talks about supply chain of, okay, well, also that's going to lead to this amount of sales with related businesses. And it also gives you the induced impact of this is how many folks may move there to work there, and this is how it's going to impact you residentially. So it kind of gives all these different metrics and indicators. So RIMS 2 and IMPLAN is our recommendation.
And IMPLAN was used to conduct that H Street Festival analysis. So that slide that we had up with all those numbers
That's right.
was really like part of that was an output of IMPLAN.
That's right. And when we do fiscal impact assessments, whether at the local program level or the statewide level, we use IMPLAN as well.
Great. We did have a few questions, folks trying to clarify those names. Jack, could you spell them out real quick, the two softwares?
Yep. IMPLAN is an acronym. I don't even remember what it stands for, but IMPLAN. Is it N? And then RIMS 2, RIMS, and then like II is like Roman numeral for 2. And RIMS 2 is a little bit less expensive, but is also more difficult. I think it's worth paying a little bit more for, in my opinion, for IMPLAN. It's a little more user-friendly.
Especially if you're looking to conduct these types of studies in-house.
Perfect. We had a question that I think I'll turn to our team. Are there examples for KPIs for other transformation strategies available? I believe Hannah, if you are on, was going to answer that.
Sure. So we don't currently have a sort of directory with the transformation strategies and KPIs listed. I would direct folks to the Resource Center on mainstreet.org has a Main Street approach sort of toolkit that has all of our resource guides and support materials all in one place. So that's sort of the go-to that does have additional background material on transformation strategies. We are currently working on a set of transformation strategy briefs that will sort of drill down more in depth into each of the different transformation strategies, and those will include some more detail on specific KPIs for various transformation strategies. So keep your eyes out for that. And when those go live, they will also be added to that toolkit that I just mentioned in the Resource Center.
Thank you, Hannah. Let's see, a couple more questions. Do you have suggestions for communities that maybe are volunteer-led with limited capacity for data collection? What would be the most impactful data for them to collect? John and Leslie, not sure if you guys have any initial thoughts there.
Yeah, I do, and I would actually say that way of thinking about it is kind of should be flipped. I think that data for the sake of data, especially for internal use, doesn't have value. Just having certain why reinvestment statistics are so valuable is because not only can it be used internally, but then the state and coordinating program can use it, and then Main Street America, National Main Street Center. So what I would say is beyond that, more of what is the story that you want to tell? Or is the objective that you're going to build support and you want to show businesses the great stuff that you're doing? Well, then maybe I would show them the amount of people that attend the events, or I would show them, frankly, the business resource, listing, or so what are the different specifics that you can use to show your value to a business? And the same thing if you're saying that to a funder. Well, maybe what you want to do is show return on investment. Show, okay, well, here's how much funding we typically get, and here's the output of this event or of this programming, and use that data to help get your funding with that particular funder. Or maybe it's, to the city, everybody loves jobs. That's one of the main things that helps, whether it's city council members, county council, town super, all the different politicians. If you can say, hey, here's how many jobs that we helped create. We helped this business stay in business. That's 10 jobs that would have left. We helped attract these 3 businesses. That's 42 jobs that we brought, and here's the incomes. And in that mind, if you're trying to, really address the city, maybe jobs is that. But I would say in a vacuum, I don't think that there's just one type of data that's better than another.
Great, thank you. A couple more, and this may be if there's any coordinators on the call or any states leveraging reinvestment stats and KPIs to build partnerships with county, regional, and state economic development organizations. I guess, John and Leslie, I'm not sure if you guys were aware of any of that in your work. Otherwise, any coordinators, I know there's a few on the call. If you have any examples or want to share, I can relay those.
Yeah, well, I can speak to Washington, D.C. In 2000, I think it was 16, or 2014. Just a few years ago, we had 8 Main Street programs in D.C., and starting this spring, we'll have 20. And a big part of what made that growth possible and what made Main Street such a desired thing, both locally by stakeholders and politically within city council and the mayor's office, is this kind of impact analysis. So a return on investment, a fiscal return on investment was conducted for Main Streets in Washington, D.C., and was done for the city. And that really helped, and at the time, the city was thinking of pulling funding for revitalized neighborhoods, for only continuing programs in kind of emerging neighborhoods, with thought process of what, this neighborhood is already doing well, why do they need more funding? And so the study helped say, no, look, this has a demonstrable fiscal and economic impact. This is a program that's successful and that should be continued, and that, helped change minds and help grow the program pretty considerably.
Great, thank you. How are temporary construction jobs considered full-time employment?
Yeah. So generally, I would say like when you know on the so I'll answer this maybe in a less Main Streety way, which is typically in economic impact you kind of look at two categories of jobs. So if when I was if I were you and kind of most of our work, you say, okay, well, if you're going to build this redevelopment, if you're going to build this infrastructure project, there's during construction, how many jobs are created. And so it's not just even construction jobs, it's sometimes designers, it's engineers, it's environmental remediators. And then there's the stabilized of, okay, now how many jobs happen. But to kind of combine those things, what you do, you use something really called kind of job years, which is, if construction lasts for 1 year and there's 100 people, that's 100 job years. And then if it lasts 4 years and 100 people, that's 400. But it really doesn't make sense unless you're talking job years, which most folks aren't, to kind of add those numbers together. And generally, when we're talking about jobs on Main Street, it's jobs where you're actually, located there on Main Street. So I would recommend, and feel free to disagree with me, national folks, but that probably wouldn't get added in on your jobs, the way that you think about jobs on Main Street.
Yes, I would think that would sound accurate on our end as well, John. Because like you said, a lot of times too, they're leaving after the project's done. So, good. I think we've got one last one that will be a good one to end us right on time. When I'm advocating for my program, what's the extent that my Main Street is creating impacts in my community? For example, if my downtown sees 20 new jobs, how do I know that these 20 jobs are because of my Main Street program?
No, that's a great question, and the answer to that is it's really tricky, and what that gets to telling the story on a small scale, it's really hard to have causality. So what you can do is speak in somewhat of generalities of like, because of the work here, we talk about this all the time. When Main Street came in, there was 20% vacancy, and now there's 10% vacancy. Is there 100% correlation or causality there? We don't know, but it doesn't really matter. Main Street played a really large role in helping to reduce vacancy. Same thing with job creation. You can say, look at all the great work that we're doing with bringing new businesses and bringing in jobs, and look at this. We've added a net new 400 new jobs. Now, once you have a large enough data set, that now you can and enough kind of time periods, now you can start looking into some correlation. And so that's what National Main Street Center is doing, of collecting indicators across, if you're looking at one particular program and you say that there is a certain type of job increase when there's a Main Street and a certain type of job increase when there's not a Main Street, well, there's a lot of variables that you're not really isolating out there. You don't know if there's a correlation. When you're looking across all 1,200, those variables start to kind of cross themselves out. And that's kind of a much more telling and a much more statistically valid sample size. So that's something that, the specific kind of causality there, we can be more precise on a nationwide level, but doesn't prevent you from telling a really great story at the local level.
Good. Thank you, John. I think that gets through all the questions we had come in, and pretty much right on time. So, again, for folks who haven't seen the guide yet, it is available on mainstreet.org. So feel free to jump over there and download it. You do need your login info. So if you have any issues with that, feel free to contact us. mainstreet@savingplaces.org, and we can help you through that. John and Leslie, I don't know if you guys have any last words. Otherwise, we can let you guys go.
No, I think we're all set. Thank you all.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Oh, yeah, just a reminder for folks, this was recorded, so we'll publish it when it's ready. And also, I believe if you follow the link that you used to join today, it should take you back to that recording once it's up and ready. So look for that in the next day or so. So great. Well, thank you, John and Leslie, and hope everyone has a great day.